Welcome, everyone, to Navigating Trump 2.0. This, of course, is the show that takes a look back at the biggest stories in Washington, D.C. over the past week, and we do it through the lens of this second Donald Trump presidential administration. And joining me this week, host of CBN's Quick Start podcast, Dan Andros. Dan, good to talk to you. It's just the two of us here this week, pal. David Brody is on assignment doing some big. He had a big interview with Caroline Levitt that we're going to see on the club on Monday, and so he's wrapped up in that. So just you and I rapping about the week.
Let's navigate away.
Let's navigate towards Signal Gate. I hate putting gate at the end of things, but for lack of a better phraseology right now, we'll call this Signal Gate. And of course, we're talking about, which everybody's heard this by now, the conversation that took place between nearly a dozen and a half senior Trump administration officials and intelligence officials about the airstrike on Houthi rebels in Yemen last weekend. Of course, this has been spilling out all over the news. We've covered it a lot here at CBN News. I'm not going to go through the whole thing right now. I will just kind of update where we are here at the end of the week as we record on Friday afternoon. On Thursday, the Senate Armed Services Committee's Republican chair, Roger Wicker, joined top Democrat Jack Reed, formally requesting an inquiry and assessment by the Pentagon's acting inspector general to take a look into the incident. And that's where I think the most interesting aspect of this is right now, because Dan, you're hearing a lot of the normal defense of the Trump administration and some of the other senior officials downplaying the incident. They've said that there was no classified information shared, but they're saying there wasn't war plans. Maybe they were attack plans. Have been going after the reporter Jeffrey Goldberg, and so I think what's most interesting about this is it's understandable how the Trump administration is, if not defensible, but how they're approaching this. Right? They just want this to go away. Democrats see blood in the water and they're going after it. I think the inflection point here is Republicans in Congress, right? If Republicans in Congress want to make a big deal about this, if they want to do what they have historically done, which is really hone in on tightening and securing our national security, our national secrets, then this would be the opportunity and the time for them to go about doing that. So that's why it seems to me that having the chairman of the Armed Services Committee, Roger Wicker, asking the Pentagon to investigate this along with the Democrat, this is really the only bipartisan part of Congress right now that we are seeing asking for more information about this. So what do you think about Republicans in Congress right now and how they have been approaching this Signal Gate so far?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a tightrope that they have to walk here, right? Because on the one hand, I think one of the stronger talking points to come out in defense of this, because if we're being honest here, like I've seen the arguments, John, that this was, 8D chess by the Trump administration trying to loop in this reporter. And I just don't buy any of those sorts of explanations. I do think this was just a mistake. And not a good mistake. You can't throw on a hostile reporter to your administration on there. And I think the tell, by the way, that this was a mistake was in how they were talking. Like when you have the vice president of the United States openly talking about optics and how we need to, not delay this launch because it'll look like we're weak. I mean, these are candid things that usually are kind of massaged out of the media and not the sorts of things you see. So it was like a fascinating look, I thought, behind the scenes. And I actually thought, other than the fact that they incompetently looped in a media reporter, I actually thought you saw a lot of competence from these administration officials. I thought actually the way they were, talking about these things and weighing them, I think you see a lot of thought going into this stuff and a lot of, just logical positions and concerns being raised when you actually look through some of these chats. But this is, let's make no bones about it here. This is a mistake. Like you cannot do this, especially when you have a hostile media who's just waiting to pounce on these sorts of mistakes. You just have to be above board. You've got to be beyond reproach as much as possible. Obviously, we're humans. We're going to make mistakes, but that they're going to take this thing and run with it and just go with it as far as they can. And I thought one of the stronger points in return, John, was saying something like talking about, well, we're not going to take national security advice from Democrats and media and Biden proponents, given what happened in Afghanistan with the withdrawal, like kind of pointing to like a something that was widely kind of considered a big mistake by the Biden administration. But when you see things like Karen Levitt coming out and saying that this is a hack reporter who's just anti-Trump, I mean, I just don't know. To me, that feels just like spin, because what else are you going to do at this point when you clearly leak this thing? What is the reporter supposed to do with this when it falls in his lap? Of course he's going to report on this. But, and I will say aside from it being just like a really embarrassing mistake, I sort of kind of lean towards agreeing with it. It's not super sensitive stuff. Like, yes, there's a strike and there's the time and there's all of this, but like, it's not like these planes on this ship are going, like you don't see super specifics on there, at least none that I've seen in reviewing the text that I've seen. So again, not good that those details are on there and out there potentially. They definitely need to review what in the world are they doing with these signal chats anyway. I know they're reviewing that right now, John, if that's even permissible inside the government, and instead of having approved secure channels. So there's a lot going on there, but you're right. I think the Republicans, from their side of things, I think they'd be better off just sort of move on, admit the mistakes. It was a mistake. We're going to find out what happened. We're going to make sure it doesn't happen again, and we're going to move on.
Yeah, it really has helped feed the story. And if you're, I think this speaks to what I think a lot of Democrats had some issues with Pete Hegseth and with Tulsi Gabbard and some others, but especially with the defense secretary, is the lack of experience, the knowing how to handle a situation like this. Like, there are SCIFs for a reason. Like, there's a reason that these kinds of conversations are generally not had over publicly available social media. And that's real. And that's what Signal is. And maybe there was a false sense of security from these folks who should have known better as members of the intelligence agencies, that Signal, while it may somewhat be encrypted, it's not secure. Like, there's a difference between those two things. I don't know if some of the folks felt there was a false sense of security with that, but I think what this is speaking to for Democrats is they look at Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth and say, our argument against him was that he's not qualified to run the Pentagon. He's not qualified to do this. And this kind of a mistake speaks to that. And I know that's the point that Hakeem Jeffries has made. And that's the point that a number of, again, the arguments you would expect to hear from top Democrats. And then that takes us to the next question. It seems like National Security Advisor Mike Waltz has taken the brunt of the blame for this, because he was the one who led the charge in establishing this text group. It seems like he was the one that inadvertently added the reporter to this text group. And if I'm a reporter, I'm doing the same thing he did, by the way. I'm just sitting back and I'm watching this information come in, and I'm not saying, and he didn't violate any secrets either. Like, he didn't report anything until well after the operation was over. And I guess my question, Dan, is if a Democratic national security apparatus had done this same thing, would the Republicans in Congress have been so willing to admit that it's just a mistake, that we should move on, there's nothing more to learn from this? It feels to me like House Oversight Committee Chair Comer and everybody else who has been investigating the Bidens so much for good reason. I understand why a lot of these hearings are taking place. If you get to be in order to be consistent, that you would also want more information about how this happened, and more importantly, how to prevent it from happening again in the future.
Yeah. And look, there's no world in which these sorts of fumbles aren't politicized, right? Both sides. Yeah. We absolutely know. Republicans, they would be dumb not to do it if something similar happened. And I'm sure there's been lapses, and I'm not thinking of any examples off the top of my head. I did mention the one where they mentioned this wasn't the same kind of lapse, but just the bumbling and the botching of the Afghanistan withdrawal. All the military equipment just being left there and things. Those sorts of things, they of course pointed out. This is what you're in office. Like, you want people to be pointing out these mistakes. Hopefully, it moves us to being better in the long run. But of course, they're going to be politicized. But yeah, it is. It plays into the Democrats' hand, the mistake, like you said, John. I agree with your point that they were saying all along that he's not fit to manage one of these things. Yes, he served, but he's not capable of this. And it feeds into that talking point. We'll see if this thing continues to have legs, or if it's one of these stories that will sort of fade away. Because like I said, I do think within the chats, again, aside from the fact that they added on a reporter on there, which is just, I think they were saying a staffer might have done that. Just inexplicable. Like, I don't, I understand why there are conspiracy theories out there saying like, well, maybe he intended to do this, because you can't think of any other way. You would just be like, oops, I added an Atlantic reporter onto the chat, onto this chat with the vice president and everything, because it's a bad fumble.
And the conspiracy theories out there of he got on the chat accident, like he got himself into the text chain, like you can invite yourself to total strangers text messages. It's like, that's not possible.
I think in one of the screenshots it says, Mike Waltz added you to the chat. I think it's, I mean, unless he photoshopped it or something, but I'm not familiar with Signal. I don't use Signal, so I'm not going to be accidentally invited on any chats anytime soon. But it does seem like you kind of got to be invited to get in there.
Well, at the end of the day, I think, and this is the last question on this, is does this actually hurt Donald Trump? It seems like it's hurting Pete Hegseth and Mike Waltz and their reputation right now. But given the fact that the voters elected Donald Trump to his second term of office, even with the classified documents at Mar-a-Lago scandal going around, which I know a lot of Republicans didn't take seriously. That, to me, of the things that he was charged with, I thought was the most serious, and I was the most interested to see how that played out.
Yeah.
But the American people more American people than not, didn't see that as a reason not to elect him to a second term of office. So here's another kind of national security. It's not necessarily, I don't know if it's a breach, but a bungling or whatever you want to call it. Will the American people care about this? Will this issue ultimately hurt President Trump politically?
If I had to project, and again, you never know how these things are gonna go out fully, but if I had to guess, I mean, I would say my best guess is that it'll be just sort of one of these things that's a negative for short term, and it's going to be something maybe they call back to in the future. To me, it will only get bad if you see like another one and another one, because I mean, President Trump, I mean, like Mike Waltz, from the screenshot we were just talking about, added Goldberg to the chat, so tough to pin that one on Trump, other than, you hired the guy. So it depends on how Trump responds, right? If this doesn't get cleaned up and we get another, we get somebody from the Daily Beast ends up on, a secure presidential chat thread or something, then yes, it's going to really snowball. So they've got to be careful from here on out. I think this one's survivable. I don't think you're going to see anybody losing their jobs over this. I don't think. But I think if there's another one, especially soon, then it'll be like red alert time.
Yeah, and I think Mike Waltz is maybe the most vulnerable out of anybody, because he hasn't been in the strongest MAGA camp. He's not one of the he's not somebody who's in kind of the same grouping as like a Pam Bondi or Kash Patel. So I think he was on maybe less stable ground amongst the MAGA community even going into this. And I think what irks President Trump most probably is the fact that he even had Jeffrey Goldberg's contact information in the first place. Sure, have you been communicating with him in the past? Like, why would you even have his phone number? On your thing. But all right, let's move along. Another interesting item that came down this week, and it didn't really hit the front pages here in the US, but there was an article in the London Telegraph this week, Dan, that asked a very interesting question. Is this the year Trump bombs Iran? The administration right now is essentially playing kind of a good cop, bad cop with Iran. Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff recently said that their signal to Iran right now is to kind of sit down and see if they can, through dialogue or diplomacy, get to a place of peace, trying to ramp down Iran's nuclear weapons program, which seemingly is coming to a head now. At the same time, that much talked about strike on Houthi rebels that we were just referring to, as that's what the Signal chat was all about. After that was successfully completed, President Trump on Truth Social threatened Iran and essentially said that anytime shots are fired by Houthi rebels on U.S. interests, it will be seen as an attack by Iran on the United States, and that there would be dire consequences if they do that. So, Dan, what do you think is behind the Trump administration's messaging towards Iran right now?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that we are, of course, allies, and Trump has been an ally, vociferously so, of Israel. And Iran, as we've talked about, I think on this show, in this segment, and I know on other shows as well, the fact that Iran has really progressed in their uranium enrichment and getting it closer towards weapons grade. I mean, they've really exponentially sort of, sped up that timeline. And so I think we all know that Iran, or at least we strongly suspect, given their rhetoric, given their stated goal to wipe Israel off the map, given the fact that they've sort of crossed the red line already and did the drone attack and then another subsequent missile attack, something we hadn't seen before. Given all of those things happening, I don't think many people doubt that Iran, a fully nuclear Iran, would in fact attempt in some way to go after Israel with that. I mean, I think that you've got zealots over there, these Ayatollahs. They're not operating on a mutually assured destruction sort of wavelength. Like they are. This is a religious, spiritual battle for them from their worldview, and they want to eliminate Israel. And so, I mean, you see them with what they do with the Houthis and Hezbollah and all these proxy groups that they support to go after Israel, and again cross that line, sort of directly going after. So I think that's one driver of it, and a main driver of it, knowing that that they are threatening seriously an ally in Israel, and them with nukes would just be really, really bad. And I think they're just trying to slow this down and stop it.
And of course, it's not easy to stop Iran from obtaining a full nuclear weapon. These facilities are very well protected. If Israel could have gotten them by now, they would have. So obviously, it seems difficult to see how only military action gets you to the point that you want to against Iran at this point. And maybe that is perhaps where Russian President Vladimir Putin comes in. Of course, there's a lot of angst among many in the United States about the United States relationship with Russia, how it's changing, seemingly coziness, or at least a warming of relations between the White House and the Kremlin. But the story does talk about Trump's relationship with President Putin and how it could impact Iran. Putin has apparently agreed to act as an intermediary between the two sides. And a lot of this has to do with Ukraine, too. I mean, Iran's looking at Russia, and they've been aligned, but, that's never been a strong alliance. And I think one of the things that they're concerned about is Russia going to sell them out in order to get the U.S. to help them on Ukraine?
Yeah, that is very interesting. And that will be very interesting to see how that plays out. Because like you said, I mean, Putin has been sort of aligned with Iran, even if it's a tenuous sort of alliance. But maybe, Putin's bigger goal is, I want to get this land over here. I want to have more control over Ukraine and maybe completely take it over at some point. I mean, who knows what his actual end goal is. But I would see Putin being an opportunist on that front. And if he thinks Trump and aligning with him and sort of, I don't see why Putin, I mean, it's not like this is a man of high morality here. Like he's not going to, hey, I'm going to honor my word to you. Like, I mean, I would not be surprised if Putin's just like, all right, this sounds good. Let's go to the highest bidder and let's move that on. And, to your point, by the way, John, I mean, maybe if we had Tom Cruise and or Maverick, I'm thinking in that movie in Top Gun Maverick, wasn't that essentially supposed to be Iran, like with the nuke site, and then they go in and they fly in there, and it was on my mind because I just watched it the other night. But I think this also, John, puts the other interesting thing here to me is it puts the Trump administration in an interesting sort of dilemma, because one of the things that a lot of America First crowds have sort of stood on when it comes to Ukraine and the defense of sort of negotiating with Putin and all this and like talking with him, is that they just they don't want to fund somebody else's war. They don't want to, get involved in war. And we would like to see peace throughout this region. But then here he's threatening some sort of military action, but obviously it's military action. So, on the one hand, you're trying to kind of position yourself as, I just want peace. But
Right.
then on this hand, you're saying, well, I'm ready to bomb Iran. And it's kind of like, okay, well, which one is it here? And
Right.
if this is a negotiating tactic, I know David's talked about this a lot, the art of the deal with Trump. Like, if this is a negotiating tactic, will Iran call the bluff? And I think so far, I mean, they've sort of rejected the initial rounds after Trump's warnings that he's done in the last week or so. They sort of have rejected coming to the table for talks. So if Trump really doesn't want it, and Wickoff said they would like to iron this out diplomatically here. So, obviously we should all be watching this and praying that there is a diplomatic solution, right? That they can figure out something here without having to drop bombs, because I think Iran is crazy. I think they're led by crazy people, if I'm being honest here. So it will get ugly over there if it does come to that, I think.
Well, one thing they do understand is self-preservation, and it's the government is at its weakest in maybe decades right now. 35% inflation right now in Iran. You'd think 3%'s bad. They got 35% over there. Israel has been torching Hamas and Hezbollah. They lost an important ally in Syria with Assad dying. They're suffering from crippling water shortages right now. They've had a drought in Iran for a couple of years now. So you have a government in Iran that is seemingly at its weakest point right now, and that could also play into any negotiations that take place here during this second Trump administration.
Mm-hmm.
Last thing before we go, Dan, there has been an interesting development in the Middle East, especially specifically in Gaza. We've seen this week a growing number of protesters in Gaza, Palestinian protesters, protesting against Hamas, not against Israel, but protesting against Hamas. There has been video that we've seen out there where they're shouting, "Hamas are terrorists, Hamas get out." A protesters called for Hamas to release the hostages that they're holding and ending their conflict with Israel. This is certainly something much different than we have seen in recent years, really maybe ever, Dan. And it seems as though, at least for a portion of the Palestinian people, they're turning their attention away from Israel and towards the governing body that has been using them as human shields, that has been putting their lives in danger, situating the Palestinian people between themselves and Iran. And it, at least for these group of protesters during this time, the protests have taken a different turn. Wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think it's very fascinating. Excuse me there. I think it's fascinating because I think this is some of the reports I'm looking at call these the largest protests open against Hamas that have ever happened inside of Gaza. And I think the reason for that is pretty plain and clear, that you're risking your own life doing that. You are going to potentially get gunned down and killed. I mean, I think, when we see, yes, there are a lot of sympathetic to Hamas sort of Palestinians in there. That's one group. But then there's other people who are just there and they're kind of caught up in this. And you wonder, like, how could a family, hold one of these hostages in their house? Because a lot of them are doing it at gunpoint. If they don't do it, they're going to get shot too, and they're going to get killed. And so you have multiple cities now, multiple large scale protests going on. And I think that speaks volumes, because I think it is getting, as reports say, quote, lonely and desperate in there. And I think when you have nothing to lose, like what do you have to gain at this point by staying aligned with Hamas? You're probably going to either starve to death or die anyway by them using you as human shield or something like that. So when you have no options, I mean, remember, John, those horrible videos we kind of touched earlier on out of Afghanistan, when the Taliban was taking over and you saw people like clinging to planes and falling off to their deaths. Like, and you think, like, well, why would somebody do that? They know that that's not going to work out, like holding onto the bottom of a plane like this. It's because they're incredibly desperate. They know they're going to die on the other way. And so they're like, this is a better option. And I think that's what they're facing in Gaza right now. And they're just saying, this isn't going to work if we stay. We have to get out at all costs. And so for them, I mean, them protesting in the streets is essentially them grabbing onto the plane and holding on. And it's really sad to see, but also good to see. Sad to see for the fact that they're in this situation, but good to see because hopefully the tide turns on that.
And of all the time to do it, I mean, you mentioned like there would be concern that they're risking their lives doing this, but Hamas is at its weakest, and the leaders are in hiding. And so, if there ever has been a time to do it, this probably is the best time. The safest time for them to have ever done it. So, and it'll be interesting to see how Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who is facing increasing demonstrations out in front of his home from Israeli crowds to urging an end to the war, who are unhappy with the attacks beginning again. But I think most Israelis understand that it is Hamas who has not followed through on the peace deal, on the prisoner exchanges, the hostage exchanges and stuff, or the hostage exchanges for prisoner exchanges.
Right.
So I want to make sure I get the language right there, because very important for sure. Dan, we'll leave it there for this week. I'm sure when we get back together next week, we'll have a whole new list of things that we can discuss. But for right now, thanks for joining me on Navigating Trump 2.0.
All right. Thanks, John.